Okay, we're going to look into beauty history and the cosmetics in ancient Egypt. This is a paper that's been given out by somebody who is doing the history of cosmetics as their dissertation paper, as their master's degree. And this is some of the information that they've given about ancient cosmetics, such as the Caucasian Egyptians here that you see. Uh, This picture is famous. It gets shown quite a bit. This is where they were sharing the incense with each other. You can see her holding her arm and holding it close to her, like, "Hey, don't bop my nose with it like you probably do," or whatever. Funny, ha ha ha. But some type of intoxicating type thing that they did. And just a preface for this. Now, Egypt was a name that was given to them by Greece, where the Grecians and Romans and so on named just about everything. In fact, changed the name that was Libya of basically all of Africa into Africa itself, and then Libya is just a small portion of that now. And they also named Ethiopia, but not the country that you think of nowadays. That was done way much later. It was known as Abyssinia from all earlier times. But they described Ethiopians at the time having been up there with Herodotus, and so they correlated it to that area and named that area. But those people that are there aren't necessarily the people that were in the Horn of Africa at that time. But the ancient Egyptians used a lot of makeup, and of course we can see that with their cat eye effect that they used, but there was reasons for it rather than just to be beautiful. And so let's just get into this, and I'll go into more of it. Cosmetics were all the rage in ancient Egypt. Women and men, rich and poor, everyone used them, and not just for vanity reasons. In fact, quite often not for vanity reasons. Back then, makeup was a necessity that helped them protect their skin against the boiling desert sun and insect bites. One thing I'd like to interject here, though, is that people quite often think that Egypt, because it is close and bordering on a desert, that is extremely hot there. But it has the cool breeze coming off the Mediterranean, and really it's no different than the Mediterranean weather, especially down in the Delta area. As you go farther and farther up the Nile, near Meroe and stuff, it gets hotter and hotter, where the Egyptians used to live, and then now pulled back down to a smaller area as it became a desert and got hotter and hotter. But Texas is quite a bit more hot than Egypt itself, just on an average. Here in Dallas type area, we're hitting 104, 106 today, 92 degrees overnight. In Egypt on this same day, it's hitting 88 degrees maximum and 74 degrees overnight. And the desert does cool off quite a bit overnight, whereas all this concrete jungle that we have around here and stuff seems to retain it and hold on to it. And with all the lack of air current pulling it off of the land because of so much trees and stuff, it has an ability to hover and hang and with a desert that's pretty much sparse, it's able to wash off and cool off a lot quicker. Just an easier way to do it. But makeup was even used for religious rituals. In fact, cosmetics were so important to the ancient Caucasian Egyptians that they were buried with them so they could use them into the afterlife. Curious to find out their beauty secrets? Well, let's read on. First, we'll discover body oils. The hot, torrid, windy climate of Egypt dries out skin, cracks open, and burns it. That's why moisturizer was an absolute must for the ancient Egyptians. It's like a lotion somewhat, or the precursor to lotions. Even workers received body oils to keep their bodies hydrated as part of their wages, lest they revolted. And this is actually seen, I did a video on it here a couple of years back, where it was the very first strike or revolt that we can find in ancient history, where the people pretty much balked on building the pyramids, or one of the temples that they were doing at the time, and said that they needed more of the makeup, they wanted more of the kohl around the eyes and their sunscreen that they had. Now, the Egyptians also made lotions to remove stretch marks, like in for childbirth and things like that. And still to this day, we use variations of that idea, like with the Palmer's extract and stuff. Ladies, if you know what I'm talking about. They also used them to stimulate hair growth and to prevent baldness, but who knows how well they worked? In fact, probably not. The ancient Egyptians used to shave themselves once they had the cattle going on very well. It's a known fact that they got lice and other cattle diseases going on, and it ran rampant through the area, so the people would shave themselves. In fact, the Egyptians would shave themselves twice a day, the priests would, to keep them very pure, very clean, and hairless. So a lot of times when you see the hair that they wear and stuff, that was wigs. But they didn't generally wear it all the time. And ironically, the wigs we find with some of them are not the color of their actual hair. So that's a strange thing. They're always shown with a dark brown or black hair. But whenever you look at these ancient Egyptians, there's a famous queen that has a headdress that's all done in black. But whenever they look at her hair, it's a light auburn type color, and it doesn't have that. Whereas they could have got that with henna and other effects. Some of the other ones do have striped bands of henna in their hair and all kinds of things. So it's but that's looked at as being more of a decorative type thing, something that maybe have done around festivals, when you're being married, and of course in death. They wanted to make you as pretty as possible. In fact, the tent and the area that they use to embalm them or whatever is for making one pretty, is what it's called. So they were dressing you up for the afterlife. They had soaps in ancient Egypt, and the ancient Egyptians cared about personal hygiene a lot. They believed an unclean and smelly body was impure, and so they kept themselves clean and well groomed at all times. They washed themselves frequently using soaps sweetened with clay or ash mixed with scented oils. And it is a special type of burnt ash that goes in this lye soap that we used to make up until just really recently. And it comes from out of there. In fact, what I was going to tell you before about the ancient Egyptians at the first was that Egypt is a brother of Greece in the Grecian stories and stuff, and that's where they get Egypt name that we use today. But in reality, they didn't call themselves necessarily that, but they did call an area, the fertile land strip that was running right down the Nile, Kemet, and it meant black soil. Basically, the Nile would flood over each year and burp out this extra soil, and in doing so, it refertilized the land. And so, like, farmlands today we can use over and over and over again, but we have to crop rotate and things like that. Well, they were getting new, fresh nutrients each season that they went through and in the inundation of the Nile. And another interesting fact that a lot of people don't know is because it was attached up to, of course, the equator, where the Nile came from in the upper Nile, which actually is lower in our vision, south, that they had a different season than most everybody else did. Like the Fertile Crescent was really pretty much doing a season that we in the northern hemisphere do today, where in the springtime we plant and it comes into harvest. Well, their springtime was pretty much late or in the August type season where they had their inundation. So this allowed people also there to utilize them whenever there became droughts and things like that. And in fact, that tit and tat back and forth probably did a lot to save humanity during extreme droughts, and especially when they were coming out of hunter-gatherers and farmers and things like that. And there would have had to have been a lot of correlation between these people. Some of it we see, some of it we can only project. The eyes of the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians used black and green paints on their eyes. The black paint made from powdered galena, and we call that coal. This is the black drawing around the eyes. It was used to protect the eyes from the hot sun. This is pretty much like in baseball today, where they put a smear of black under their eyes, and this reflects away a lot of the light going into the eyes and allows baseball players to look up into the sun almost. You can't look directly into the sun, but you can look very much so, and it blocks it out. So it's a sunblock type thing for your eyes. The green paint made from malachite powder, or it's a green colored mineral, was used to make the eyes appear larger. Plus, they believe that this paint invoked the eye of Horus, the god of the sky and sun and healing. So if you wore it, the god would protect you. And so he was protecting you even from Ra, the sun god that was actually there have it. Now they use the green, they say, to make eyes larger. And if you look at some of my other videos, it can show you that even the earliest Egyptians, they had green and blue eyes. There's these blue crystal eyes that they used in the very earliest of dynasties all the way through like 12th dynasty. And then they seem to have lost the technology around then, but they are made from crystals and inset in the eyes, and it looks just like real eyes, you know, like Paul Newman blue eyes. Some of them have the effect where if you're facing straight on at the right angle, it's very blue, but as you go back and forth left and right of that, it turns gray. So that's quite neat too. They also have the effect that they follow you around the room. So to make these paints, the Egyptians powdered the minerals on a palette. And you see those palettes that are like the Narmer palette and so on, where it shows the two lionesses with long necks, and they curly Q around, and it makes this oval area in the center of it, and that's where they would grind up this type of stuff. So it actually goes from pre-dynastic times that they were doing this stuff. And another quick mention there, that long-necked giraffe, if you will, lion, that is a symbology from Sumeria. And I've showed quite a few times where that and the Master of Beasts and things like that are showing right at the very first of Egyptian civilization into dynastic times, and it drifts out. So there was definitely a correlation between those people that comes in. So they used them on the palette, and then they would mix them with a substance probably derived from animal fats, and that would make them adhere to the eye better. So it'd be like a paste type of thing that they could smear across, and then it would hold on to, like you would put glitter in a lotion. So if you tried to put glitter on your eyes, it'd come off real easy. But if you were to smear it in with lotion on your eye, it would dry and stay to your eye. To apply these paints, they used either their fingertips or little sticks of wood, bone, or ivory. And this actually showed you a little bit of their, I guess, wealth system that was there, because quite often the youngest people are the poorest people, the not as well-to-do people would have these palettes and things, but they would not have the sticks with them, or they would just have a stick. Whereas the richer people had a more elaborate palette, more elaborate jars, and they would have like bone or ivory sticks that were intricate and stuff to use for it. So it's the same thing. I've got a comb, you've got a comb. Mine's regular, yours is gold with ivory insets into it, but it combs my hair. Red ochre is something that's very important too. The Egyptians used red ochre mixed with fat or gum resin to color the cheeks and the lips, like to give a blushing effect. You know what they talk about, Adamic is to be blushing, like in the Bible. And so they use this like we do today with ladies putting blush on or whatever. And that's usually in a sense that a woman is excited, or man is excited or whatever, or flushed and things like that. But it shows a sign of beauty and adds to it. And so they did so to help enhance their beauty also. This wasn't something that would have been done for sunblocking as per se, because of course that would just block your cheeks off. Once you washed off from that, you would have light colored cheeks and dark skin from tanning. It would look hilarious. But red ochre was also mixed with coal and sycamore juice, which is Hathor's sacred tree, to create a mixture that could help heal scars caused by burning, like burning by the sun, or even burns themselves. So they knew, and there is some medicine type reality to this effect, although they found much better, of course, since then. So whenever I talked about chemet a minute ago, and then you think of the word chemistry, it goes together. And why does that go together? Well, these people invented water insoluble paints. So in other words, they couldn't be washed off with water and things, and use those paints on the walls. This was something that was done sacred by the scribes, and it was passed on from father to son to father to son. These are like those blue-eyed guys you see sitting in a Buddha type position writing and things. They have these blue crystal eyes on them and stuff in the earliest of dynasties. And it's passed down from father to son. They don't describe what they did to make all of the paints and stuff that they do. It's like they know the paints because they're the painters, and they're no tell everybody else. It's need to know basis, if you will. Now, henna is a natural dye derived from the leaves of Lawsonia inermis shrub. Well, once its green leaves are crushed and dried, they create a reddish powder. The Egyptians would mix this powder with water to form a paste, which they used to paint nails and dye gray hair back to a youthful look. For your information, both men and women used it to stain their lips red also, so to have a more red appearance to their lips and stuff. But henna would be done, and to this day you can see a lot of people using henna tattoos and stuff like that. I did a video recently where they showed that these people are using a fake type of henna now in the area, and in North Africa, Morocco, when you go to visit there, and for tourists visiting there, they'll do this henna painting on you and stuff, but some of it can be fairly caustic to your skin, and it's kind of bad or whatever. But what's strange about that was it was an actually article written by a black girl, or it was video, where she cackled like a witch, laughing at the fact that they had that happen to them, and that they were supposed to be the Egyptians and all this type of stuff. Well, they of course were the Egyptians, and henna doesn't show up on black people. Lighter admixed black people now can show up something like that, or like tattoos, which also I've shown in videos where even the pre-dynastic, known as Ginger, who has the blonde hair that's curly like the Greeks, the very first pre-dynastic Egyptians that they found the mummy that was naturally desiccated, had tattoos too. And the correlation, and I'm going to do a video about this soon, but if we think about that right there, within 1,000 years we actually have the Scythians with tattoos on them, which I've shown a video now. Then we also have Proto-Indo-Europeans, same type of people, up near Siberia, also tattooed at the same time. We also have Utsi, the Iceman, and he is tattooed near the same time, even predating it, but almost the same time. And then pre-dynastic Egyptians also having this tattoo. And so it's a correlation of ancient times where they know each other, and they've investigated into looking at it microscopically, and it shows that they really pretty much use the exact same technique too. And later we find that through the Maori tribes of New Zealand and so on. And then whenever I was a kid, to this day, people are still told that sometimes that oh, well, that was found from the Maori, and these islander people and American servicemen, when they went over there, saw them be tattooed, and then they started doing it and tattooing mom and love on their arm and things along that situation. But actually, believe it or not, these Caucasians all over the area that was right there is actually the people that started tattoos in the first place, and the Maori didn't begin it at all. And then there's a story about those ancient Maori too, and then whenever they showed up in the island, that there actually were already Waka blondes there and stuff, and it shows you who might have given them the idea of even having that in the first place. But that's tattoos. Another thing about red ochre, though, while we're here, red ochre is a symbolic paint color, and we still use it to this day. You watch Bob Ross, and he's used yellow ochre, red ochre, and so on, phthalo blue, and Prussian blue, and da-da-da. And these are ancient colors that are still made to this day, made slightly different now, of course. But red ochre is shown in the art of the ancient Egyptians all the way through, too, where men are drawn with a symbolic red ochre color, and women are usually much more pale. And this signifies that the men do work. They're out in the sun all the time. They're getting extremely tanned and so on, and the females didn't have to work. And it's not anything that's just Egyptian, though. You can see this exact same symbology in ancient Greece, where the men are shown quite often to be red ochre colored, but women shown to be pale. They like to keep women paler, so it's also mentioned in the Bible a few times. In fact, there's a portion where she tells you, "Don't look upon me, O Israel, for I am tanned," or "I am dark," depending on which way you want to, interpret it. The next line tells you why. She says, "For the sun hath looked upon me." The name there is Shamash, and Shamash is the Sumerian sun god, and also the god of the people around the area. But she goes on to say also that her brothers made her work in the fields, and so she had became tan, and she was apologizing for even being tanned. So quite neat. This henna is seen in quite a few places too. One famous place that it interjects into ancient Egypt and finding out about a lot about it was Ramses himself. Ramses the Great. He was known to have been around 90, 92 years old whenever he died, and so he had gray hair, but whenever you look at it, it is definitely a reddish orange colored hair. And they found that they had dyed his hair red with this henna that they have. So they took a couple of pieces of his hair and then look at it under a microscope. Of course, you can easily tell it's Caucasian hair, and it has turned gray, but at the rooting and follicles, they could tell that it used to be red too. So what they were doing was dyeing his hair back to its natural red color. You can also see this in Islam, where people constantly to this day will dye their beards red and stuff, and this is an effigy to him because he's known to have had red hair. And they have some of his beard hairs actually still to this day that's supposed to be attested to, and it tells you that people witnessed this whenever he got his beard cut off and so on and everything. So it correlates out pretty well. But so henna can be used in a lot of ways. Perfumes, though. The Egyptians loved strong scents made of lots of perfumes using ingredients like myrrh, cinnamon, cassia, chamomile, lavender, peppermint even, lily, cedar, aloe, rosemary, rose olive oil, and almond oil blended with animal fats and oil. What's weird is she's not mentioning the lotus. And it is extremely important to these people, the blue lotus and the fragrance of the blue lotus. And in fact, right next to Libya are these areas known as the lotus eaters, lotophages. So it had a lot more to do with it. But also they find recipes that are in there, and you talk about, chamomile milk, chamomile almond oil, and almond milk, and things like that. And these are the people that started doing that situation in the very first. So they had a need and they sought it out. So you talk about chemistry. This is the primordial first things people were doing, of course. I'm sure they tried something that didn't work out, or when you put certain things together, it chapped their skin, and they just made a note, don't do that again. They knew several ways of making perfumes. A common method was enfleurage. Flowers, roots, or resins were soaked in layers of fat to create creams and pomades. These were worn in the shape of a cone on the top of their heads and would melt throughout the day, running down their faces and necks, scenting them. Or they would go to the point that it was melted and rub it over their bodies or whatever. But there are descriptions that talk about this. And they also talk about using it in the sunblock type method, where they would rub it all over their bodies, just like we do today. Although whenever I was a kid, the rage was all sun tanning. Now it's realizing that this sun can do far too much damage to your skin. You'll look like a leather face when you get older and stuff. But yeah, definitely in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, it was definitely a suntan oil. And then rapidly it changed over real quickly to sunblock. One thing I can interject here about sunblock, whenever I was deep into coral reefs and things and stuff, I was asked, along with the University of Texas and a few students from around the United States and even some in Hawaii, to set up aquariums actually identical to each other with the same amount of live rock, live sand, and then put a few different special corals in each one that were identical to each other, so you couldn't have any mix-up. Simple fish, so I used a damsel and a Nemo in each one, Percula clown, and put in cleaner shrimp or banded coral shrimp in each one of them and ran them on filter, got them all cycled through and broke in real well, added the corals to them. Similar lighting, in fact, the same lighting system stretched across multiple aquariums, and so they got within a parameter the exact same lighting and things, all was going on, and we monitored the water conditions constantly. And what we found out was that what we would do is take a toothpick and stick it into the stuff and put a drip into there. Now, we didn't do this just every day because we wanted to see the effects and things that would happen over time. So the first test was over a week, and we'd see what happened and everything. And we used all the different various forms. I believe we were 14. We cut it down to 12, finding that most of them used the similar ingredients of each other, but we found ones like bullfrog and so on that did different things or stayed supposedly stuck to your skin. It was one of the worst ones, by the way. Certain ones of these would try to crash the filtration, which helped keep the water quality up, and that would cause problems for the fish and corals, definitely. But other ones didn't seem to do as much. But then there were corals that could be affected a little, like polyps and things like that, but other corals would just die real quick in the presence of this. And so it's looked at as being bad for the coral reefs. And if you go to Hawaii today, they won't let you carry that bad sun block onto the even island. It doesn't. If you somehow got onto the plane with it, it goes in a trash can. And same thing with Cozumel and so on. And they only let you use certain sunblocks. And the Egyptians came up with two of these that are still acceptable today in coral reefs because they're natural. One is done from a bran oil, and the other was done from a oatmeal extract. And if you'll look into it, those are the ones that are touted for being used around coral reefs. And I actually had something to do with it, trying to save the coral reefs. They quite often were saying that there was all these things were causing death to the coral reefs and stuff. And they found out that on a few islands, Fiji being one of them, in this one tourist area, the corals were going away, and they're blaming it on touching corals or doing something else. And then they come to find out the misnomer here is that these people here are all European and Americans and stuff that are coming in and using this suntan oil, and it's affecting the reef. And the water went out and drifted, like say east, drifted off to the side this way, and in that direction is where the same coral was having the problem as, whereas just 100 yards that way it seems like it's untouched because the water drifts this way. Finding that out in a few places and making the correlation, we put it all together. It's quite amazing. In fact, there's a video out now that talked about Fiji and it having corals just dying like rampant, and they were trying to figure it out. At the very end of it, they plea for you for money and everything else. But what's hilarious about that, and I know personally, that whenever they went back to the main town that they had there, in between, they found this new place, this big building that they'd set up, and they said, what's this new place? They only had to stop because somebody was running cattle there and they had to wait, and they're like, well, what's that? And they go, oh, that's a new paint plant. While they were looking at it, there was somebody washing off incorrectly made paint right off into the ditch. Where does the ditch go? Into that creek that we crossed over on the way up here. Where does that go? It goes into the water. Where's it go in the water at? Right where those corals are having that problem. And where's it drift? It drifts that way. Where are they having a problem? That way. So they had to basically shut down that paint plant, and it all started coming back. Then coral conservationists went out there and they took corals from the good area and placed a few around in the other area, and it's almost like you can't tell now. Isn't that amazing? Another situation very similar to this, not to go off on left field, this is, totally without to do the situation, but whenever Recife was receiving shark bites and everything, they were talking about that, and they had a extreme, all of a sudden in the last couple of years, a lot of tourists getting bit by sharks and things, and trying to figure out what's causing this problem. They did the same type of thing, and they went, when they were going back up to the main city to get supplies and so on, they had to get stopped for cattle being run into this thing, and they're like, well, what's that? And they go, that's the new cattle plant. And they're washing all the blood right off into a creek that goes into a river that goes right out into that bay where all these people are at, and so the sharks are being baited into the bay and biting on people. And it was just hilariously stupid. But they figured that out. So let's get back to this, though. Another popular method was called maceration. Basically, they would heat fats or oils to a temperature of 65 degrees Celsius or bring it up to near a boil. Then they would add flowers, herbs, fruits finally to it. The mixture was sieved, and then once cool, shaped into cones or balls. And so this is getting an essence out of each thing, like a potpourri. And it's quite a lot to do with the way that we make perfumes today. And you can easily take, my girls have seen this DIY and all this type of stuff. We've got flowers out here in the flower bed and roses and stuff. They took a bunch of roses, put it into a pestle. They crushed it a little bit, as much as they could. They put some baby oil type stuff in there and shook it around for a while, stuck it in the microwave, got it up to hot, let it get cool again, sieved it through, and then, oh my God, it's got rose. It smells, like rose or whatever. So, my mom tells me that a lot of people would use vanilla for a type of perfume whenever she was a youngster. So it was a fad, and there's still like vanilla ones that are out today. In fact, one year I got some for my sister, but regardless of that, Hair. On festive occasions, both men and women wore wigs made out of human hair. Archaeologists have found short, fine-toothed combs and hairpins used by Egyptians on their hair. A lot of these are seen as a straight comb, but a lot of times it's weird. They'll have a very fine-toothed comb, as she described here, and a thicker tooth comb. Just like if you get one of those little old barber combs, you'll see the left side of it is thin, the other side is right. Which side do you hold out to brush your hair? And the finer, thin part was to get lice out of their hair and things like that. It seems like the other one was used to part it, and they would even use these things like a hair applique, where they could pull their hair back and then stab this comb into it, and it would hold it in place. Kind of, before they had scrunchies and all that type of thing. Pretty neat. Whenever they checked all of their hair, of course, from the earliest to the latest times, it's always Caucasian hair, of course. Although everyone, regardless of their social status, wore makeup, you could tell who was rich and who was poor by the quality of the applicators and the pots they used. Rich people kept their cosmetics in beautiful, ornate, and jeweled containers and used ivory applicators, while the poor had clay pots and small sticks, or maybe not at all. So that's like I was describing to you earlier here on it. And that's about it. The history of nail polish and coloring nails. We could go into that too. And here's real long ancient hair. This is from Vril. If you've studied any of the ancient study in Germanics and Vril, and the belief in the growing out of the hair. It's also shown in the Bible all the way back to the time of Samson. He had his hair giving the strength. They cut his hair off. Of course, that goes with the Nazarites, where the Nazarites would grow out their hair and then they would shave their head whenever they became sexually active, and then sacrifice that to the gods and so on. It's the reason that Jesus, the Nazarite, is shown to be long hair. A lot of people can't make the connection. But anyhow, guys, so that's just some of the cosmetics, and of course I add to it a little bit and try to tell you some stuff that I know about other things, and sunblock and things like that. But yeah, ancient Egyptian beauty history, just in there. And they used that kohl around their eyes. They had imported in. Not a lot of other people are seen using that same type of idea, but then again, the more north you go over there, you don't really have to. Although when you see a baseball player playing, even though they play up in Baltimore, they still have that black around their eyes. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Peace.